There is a body, 3 floors under the Ministry of Magic on a stone table, under a plain white sheet, with a card tied to one toe, 71 years old, underfed, one hand burned so long ago the scar has gone silver. The card says, Riddle, Tom Marvolo. He was mortal the entire time. Albus Dumbledore worked that out in 1981 and told nobody for 16 years. And the boy the whole country called a weapon was never connected to him at all. If you like timelines that break quietly instead of loudly, subscribe, because that is the only thing this channel makes. And put your answer in the comments now before we start. If you knew he could be killed, would you have said so out loud? Right. Back to the room with the table in it. The room is cold, and it is cold on purpose. Preservation charms work better when the air is already close to freezing. The Ministry has been keeping this body for 11 days. 3 separate committees are still arguing about who is allowed to look at it. Healer Ivo Sharp has looked at it more than anyone. Sharp has weighed it, measured the length of the femur and the width of the shoulders and the depth of an old break in the sternum. 11 pages of notes have come out of him, in small tidy handwriting. Sleep has not, since the first page. The trouble is not the corpse. Healer Sharp has handled hundreds. The trouble is that this one is so ordinary. That is the part that has undone him. Something else had been expected, by him and by everybody. For 16 years, the country had told itself a story about a thing that could not be killed. A shape in the dark. A voice under a hood. Something that had come back from a death everybody witnessed. And here it is on a table. There is a bunion on the left foot. The enamel is worn off 2 of the back teeth from grinding them in sleep. The hair is thin and grey and would have been black once. Healer Sharp knows what he's going to be asked. The answer has been rehearsed in the cold, over and over. They will ask him whether the body could have been killed at any point in the last 16 years by any competent witch or wizard with a clear line of sight, and he is going to have to say yes. On the 12th of June, 1998, 6 weeks after the fighting stopped, the Wizengamot opened a public inquiry, not a trial. There was nobody left alive to try. An inquiry in courtroom 2, with the benches full and the doors open and a clerk taking every word down on enchanted parchment. Its official title ran to 4 lines. Everybody shortened it. They called it the Riddle Inquiry. They were careful to say it in a flat voice. In Britain, that name had been said out loud by fewer than 100 people in the whole of living memory. The chair was Griselda Marchbanks. She was very old. She had examined Tom Riddle herself in his Transfiguration Practical in 1943, given him top marks, and thought nothing more about it for 55 years. Her opening remarks lasted under a minute. She did not talk about grief, or courage, or the fallen. She said that the inquiry had one question, and that she intended to have it answered before the summer ended. The question was not how he died. The question was how a man who could be killed stayed alive for 16 years in a country of 30,000 witches and wizards who wanted him dead. And here is the part I still think about. To answer that, they had to go all the way back and take apart the night everybody thought they understood. Because in this timeline, the thing that happened at Godric's Hollow on the 31st of October, 1981, was not what you were told. It was smaller. It was slower. And a man walked away from it on foot, down a village lane, holding his hand. Statement 1, given under oath. Healer Ivo Sharp sat in the witness chair with his notes on his knee and did not use them once. A small man, with ink on his cuff and a habit of answering slightly before the question finished. Griselda Marchbanks liked him immediately. Almost nobody expected that. She had spent the previous hour being extremely rude to a man from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement who tried to tell her what she was allowed to ask. "You examined the body," Marchbanks said. "9 times, said Sharp. 9. I kept expecting to have missed something. "And had you?" "No, ma'am." "That is what took 9 goes. Somebody in the public benches laughed and then stopped, embarrassed. Marchbanks let it pass. "Tell the inquiry what you found." Sharp put his hands flat on his knees. Down in the cold room, he had decided to do this in order, from the outside in. That was the only way to keep his voice steady. "A male body," he said, 71 years and 4 months old, give or take a season. Height, 6 foot and 1 inch. Weight, 9 stone 4. That is roughly 3 stone under what a frame that size should carry. He had been living on very little for a very long time. Meaning what, in plain terms? Meaning he was hungry, ma'am? For years. Not starving. Hungry. The clerk's quill kept moving. Nobody in the room said anything at all. The skin is white and thin, and it has not seen much sun since the early 1980s. The nose is intact, which surprised the 2 Auras who identified him, because they had both been told to expect otherwise. The eyes are dark brown, not red. There is no red pigment in a human eye, and there never was. Go on. The left hand shows an old thermal injury across the palm and the inside of the fingers. Full thickness, healed without treatment, or without proper treatment, which is close to the same thing. The scarring is silver, and the tendons underneath contracted as it closed, so the hand never opened flat again after it happened. A wand he could hold. Shaking hands was another matter, and he could not have done it with anybody and passed for normal. Marchbanks leaned forward very slightly. Can you date the injury? Not to a day, to a decade. It is at least 15 years old and no more than 20. And the shape of it? Healer Sharp hesitated for the first time. It is a print, he said, a small one. It is the print of a hand about 4 inches across, pressed into his palm. The room made a noise, not a gasp, a sort of collective shift. 40 people moving in their seats at once. Marchbanks let that pass too. 60 years on the Wizengamot had taught her one thing about days like this. You let people move when they need to. Now, before we go any further, I want to stop and put one thing on the table, because everything else in this story sits on top of it. In the timeline, you know, Tom Riddle spent his life cutting his soul into pieces and hiding them in objects. A diary, a ring, a locket, a cup, a diadem, a snake, and by accident, a boy. 7 pieces, or thereabouts, scattered across Britain, each one an anchor, holding him to the world. That is why the killing curse that rebounded at Godric's Hollow did not finish him. It could not. There was too much of him left, elsewhere. In this timeline, he never made a single one. Not because he grew a conscience, because at 16, in a bathroom on the first floor of Hogwarts, with a dead girl on the tiles and a diary open on the sink, he ran the numbers and did not like them. The books in the restricted section had been vague about what the split cost. Vagueness is a terrible thing to hand a clever boy, because a clever boy fills it in with the worst case. Tom Riddle sat on the wet floor and thought it through. Handing a piece of himself to an object meant guarding that object forever. A hidden thing is only hidden until somebody finds it. And what exactly would be left of the part still walking around? So he closed the diary. The memory stayed of that night in his head, where he could reach it, and nowhere else. And so he stayed whole, which made him sharper, which made him patient, which made him, in every way that mattered, on a battlefield or in a drawing room, considerably more dangerous than the version of him you have read about. It also made him something he had spent his entire life refusing to be. It made him a man who could die. Hold on to that. Every single thing in the next 2 hours comes from it. Continue, healer, said Marchbanks. There is a healed fracture of the sternum, Sharp said. Old, same era as the burn, within a year or 2. The bone knitted badly, which tells me it was never set. 2 ribs on the left the same. There is nerve damage down the right arm, of the sort a serious magical injury leaves. The muscle on that side is wasted compared to the left. His wand arm, said the chairwoman. Yes, ma'am. You are telling this inquiry that Lord Voldemort had a bad arm. There it was. The name, said out loud, in a public courtroom, by a woman of 100 and something, who had stopped being frightened of anything decades ago. Half the public benches flinched. A young clerk near the door actually ducked, as though a word could be thrown. I am telling the inquiry, Sharp said carefully, that the man on my table had a bad arm, 16 years of it, and counting, and he had learned to work around it so well that nobody who fought him ever noticed. Could he have been killed? Sharp blinked at her. Ma'am? You heard me, healer. Could that body have been killed at any point by a spell? Sharp took a breath. That body could have been killed by a falling roof slate, he said. There is nothing in it that is not human. There is nothing in it that has been altered, extended, preserved, or protected. I have examined witches of 110 who were harder to kill than this. There were no defences in his flesh at all. Just a thin, cold, hungry man with a ruined hand. Any competent duellist with a clear shot and no hesitation would have finished him. Marchbanks let the room settle for a moment. Then why, she said, did it take us 16 years? That, said Healer Sharp, is not a medical question. He said it without any smugness at all, and that was somehow worse. The clerk wrote it down. It ended up in every paper in the country the following morning, printed under a picture of the courtroom doors. For about a week, it was the only sentence anybody in Britain wanted to argue about. Marchbanks asked one more thing before she released him. Cause of death? Renal failure, said Sharp. Secondary to 16 years of poor food, untreated injury, and repeated exposure to dark magic performed on himself. The auras took a man who was already dying. Death would have come by August, whatever anybody did. And the injury sustained at Hogwarts on the 2nd of May? Contributed. Did not cause. So he was not killed. No, ma'am. The man wore out. Griselda Marchbanks sat back in her chair, and for a moment she was not a chairwoman of an inquiry. She was a very old woman who had marked an examination paper in 1943. She had written the word outstanding in the margin, in her own hand. It sat beside the name of the boy who had just worn out on a table 3 floors down. Thank you, Healer, she said. You are released. He stood, gathered the notes he had not opened, and made it 4 steps toward the door before she spoke again. One last thing. The hand. Sharp turned. You said a print. A child's. Yes, ma'am. Would you swear to that? I already have, he said. Then the doors closed behind him. The inquiry sat for 11 minutes, in a silence nobody wanted to be first to break. Every single person on those benches had just done the same arithmetic. A burn the size of a small hand, 16 years old, and there was exactly one child in the whole of Wizarding Britain whose hand had ever been near that man when he was that badly hurt. 17 years old now, 3 floors up, in a corridor, waiting to be called. And the first thing he was going to be asked was the one question he had never in his life been able to answer. Statement 2, given under oath. Harry Potter stood up when the doors opened and the usher looked straight past him and called a different name. Shacklebolt, Kingsley, Aura Office. Harry sat down again. That corridor had held him since 8:30 in the morning. It was now 2:20. A house elf had brought him a sandwich at noon. Half of it went down and then he stopped. Talking about his mother in front of 200 strangers was coming, and his stomach had made a decision without asking him. Kingsley Shacklebolt walked past him, put a hand briefly on his shoulder and said, "They will get to you tomorrow. Go home tonight." "I am fine." "You are not fine. You are 17, and you have been in a corridor for 6 hours. So have you." "I have been in this corridor for 16 years, said Kingsley, and went in. The oath came out in a voice you could hear at the back of the room. Kingsley had one of those voices. Deep, unhurried, entirely certain. And for 16 years it had been the voice that told families their case had been closed with no result. "Aura Shacklebolt," said Marchbanks. "You led the search. From 1985. Before that I was on it. From 1985 I ran it. Describe it." Kingsley thought about that for a moment, then he did something that made the newspapers the next day as well. Out of his robes came a folded piece of parchment. Open it went, and it kept opening. It went on opening until it hung off both sides of the witness box and pooled on the floor. "This is the sighting register," he said. "Every reported sighting of Tom Riddle between the 1st of November 1981 and the 2nd of May 1998. 4,106 entries. Each one investigated, each one written up. How many were him? 1. The word landed like a dropped plate. 1, ma'am, in 16 years. On the 24th of June, 1994, in the churchyard at Little Hangleton. And the other 4,105? Frightened people, said Kingsley. Mostly. Some of them were lying for attention. Some were settling scores with a neighbour. Most of them saw a thin man in a coat at dusk, and their whole body told them it was him. That is what 16 years of being frightened does to a person's eyes. Was any harm done by these reports? Asked Marchbanks. Yes. What harm? Kingsley folded the parchment back up carefully, the way you fold something you have been carrying for a long time. In February 1987, a Muggle man in Cardiff was hit with 3 separate curses in the street by 3 separate witches who did not know each other. The man was a bus inspector, 56 years old, tall, thin, pale, with a long face. The man lived. Why it happened, he does not know and never will. We adjusted his memory afterwards and told his wife he had been in an accident. And that was the only such case, said Marchbanks. That was the worst one. There were 19 others. 19, Ma'am. 3 of them died. Now here is the thing about this timeline that I do not think gets said enough. And it is the reason I wanted to make this episode at all. In the story, you know, the Second War was loud. Bridges came down. There were mass breakouts and public murders and a ministry taken in a single afternoon. And there were months when the front page of the paper was a list of the dead. It was a war, and everybody knew they were in it. This one was not like that. This one had a body count in the low hundreds across 16 years, and a great deal of that was not him at all. It was people being frightened in the dark and pointing wands at strangers. A mortal man cannot fight a loud war. A loud war means being in rooms. Being in rooms means being seen. And being seen means somebody eventually gets lucky. Tom Riddle understood that from the moment he woke up in a wood outside Godric's Hollow, with his hand ruined and his chest broken, and no anchor anywhere in the world to fall back on. So he never fought a loud war. What he fought instead was a quiet one, mostly through other people. It went on twice as long, and did about 1/5 of the damage. It left the country in a state that historians still cannot agree on a word for. Not war, not peace. 16 years of a room with a door that would not quite shut. Tell the inquiry how the search was conducted, said Marchbanks. Badly, said Kingsley. I would prefer detail to self-flagellation, Aura. Then I will give you detail, and you can decide which it is. He counted it off on his fingers. 1. We watched the places he had ties to. The orphanage in London, until it was pulled down in 83. The house at Little Hangleton, Borgin and Berks. The village of Little Hangleton itself. In 16 years, he went to exactly one of them, exactly once. 2. We watched his people. Everybody who had ever worn a mask. That is where most of our effort went. That is where most of it was wasted. Because he stopped meeting them. Stopped entirely, said Marchbanks. Between 81 and 89, as far as we can establish, Tom Riddle spoke to no living Death Eater at all. Not one. Not a letter, not a meeting, nothing. Lucius Malfoy testified to this inquiry on Tuesday, and I believe him. That is not something I say often about Lucius Malfoy. Why would he cut himself off from his own followers, said Griselda Marchbanks. Because they could be caught, said Kingsley, and a man who can be killed cannot afford to be inside anybody else's memory. And the third method? Kingsley was quiet for a second. 3, he said. We used the boy. Marchbanks did not move. Explain that, please. For the record, a theory existed. It came from a ministry unspeakable in 1982, and it was never properly tested, and it went like this. A curse that strong does not rebound cleanly. Something transfers. The child has a mark on his forehead in the shape of the curse. Therefore, the child is connected to the caster. Therefore, the child can be used as an instrument. If Riddle came close, the boy would know. If Riddle felt strongly, the boy would feel it. And was that true? No, said Kingsley. Was it ever true? It was never true for 1 second of 16 years. No connection existed. There was never anything in his head that was not his. He is a boy with a scar. Then what did the ministry do with this theory? Kingsley looked at his hands. We built policy on it, he said. From 91, a standing instruction required that Harry Potter's location be logged daily. From 92, a member of the Aura office was assigned to be near him at all times, under a variety of covers, and the boy did not know. From 94, he was interviewed by Unspeakables 4 times a year and asked to describe any dreams, 14 years old when that started. They told him it was for his safety. It was not. It was because the Department of Mysteries wanted to see whether we had a divining rod, and nothing came of it. Nothing came of it because there was nothing there. We spent 6 years asking a child what he could feel. Every time he said nothing, somebody senior wrote down that he was not trying hard enough. The silence in courtroom 2 went on a long time. Outside in the corridor, Harry Potter sat on a wooden bench with half a sandwich in his pocket. None of it reached him through the door. None of it would reach him for another 9 days. Aura Shacklebolt, said Marchbanks eventually. You said there was one confirmed sighting. Yes, ma'am. 1994. Little Hangleton. Yes, ma'am. Who made it? Kingsley Shacklebolt was not a man who found things difficult. The line at the Department of Mysteries he had held. Bellatrix Lestrange had beaten him twice in a duel, and twice he had come back. 41 families had been told by him that their case was closed with no result. He had a face for that. 16 years had gone into building it on purpose. There was no face for this. I did, he said. And what came of it? Nothing came of it, ma'am. Why not? Because I let him walk away. Statement 3. Given under oath, Marchbanks did not let Kingsley Shacklebolt finish that afternoon. She stopped him mid-answer. That caused a small uproar in the press benches. Then she said, in the flat voice of somebody who has run a great many hearings, that the inquiry would return to the summer of 94. It would do so once it had established what happened on the 31st of October, and not 1 minute before. You cannot understand why a man let him go, she said, until you understand what he was letting go of. Then she called Bathilda Bagshot. They had to bring her in a chair. She was 107. She had written the standard history textbook that every child in Britain had been made to read for 60 years. She had lived in the same house on the square at Godric's Hollow since before the First World War. She had watched the Potters move in. She had brought them a fruitcake. She was also, by 1998, only about half in the room at any given time. Marchbanks knew it. Everybody knew it. They called her anyway because there was nobody else. Madam Bagshot, said Marchbanks, very loudly and very clearly. Do you know why you are here? I'm here because of the noise, said Bathilda. What noise? On the Sunday, bonfire night was coming. The children had been at the pumpkins all week. Her hands moved on the arms of the chair, folding something that was not there. I had my window open because the cottage smokes if I shut it. And I heard the front door of the Potter house. You heard a door. I heard that door, said Bathilda, with sudden sharpness. 52 years I have heard that door. It sticks in the wet, and James used to put his shoulder to it. It did not stick that night. It came off. Marchbanks let the room settle. Tell us what you saw. And here the old woman's voice changed. There is a thing that happens to some very old people. The last 60 years are fog, and one particular night is bright as a lamp. She had been standing at her upstairs window with a cup of tea going cold in her hand. The door of the cottage across the square hung open, off one hinge. There was light in the hall, and the light was moving, which meant somebody had knocked the lamp. She heard a man shout once, a single word, and it was not a spell, it was a name, and the name was Lily. Then green light in the downstairs window. Just the once. And then, said Bathilda, nothing. For a long time. Long enough that she got as far as her stairs and came back. Because she was 70 years past being any use in a fight, and she knew it. The green light came again. Upstairs this time. In the small room at the end where the baby slept. And then the roof came off. Not all of it. The corner. It went up and out. Slates spinning over the square and into her garden. One of them cut the head off a rose bush she had grown for 30 years. And out of it came a sound she had never been able to describe properly to anybody since. It was not a bang, she said. Everybody says bang, it was a suck. It was the noise a fire makes when you open the door on it wrong. And then the baby cried, said Bathilda Bagshot. And I thought, well, thank God for that. The room was silent. Madam Bagshot, did you see anybody leave that house? I have said so for 17 years, and nobody has ever wanted it. This inquiry wants it. Please tell us. She looked at Marchbanks, and there was something in the look that reminded everyone present that this woman had once been the most careful writer of history in Britain. A man came out of the front door, she said. He came out slowly. Down the 2 steps he came. Then he stopped in the road and stood there. He was holding his left hand out from his body like this. She held her own hand out. Palm up, fingers curled. It was the way you hold something you have just picked up off a hot stove. He looked back at the house. Then he walked out of the square, past the church, and down the lane toward the muggle end of the village, on his feet, like a man going to the post. He did not disapparate, said Marchbanks. He did not. Are you certain? There is a sound, said Batilda. It is like a cork. There was no cork. Now stop and hold that image, because it is the single most important picture in this entire story. In the timeline, you know, there is nothing to see at that moment, because there is nothing left standing there to see. The curse rebounds and the man is gone, torn out of his own body. What floats out of that house is less than a ghost and more than nothing. It goes east across the sea to a forest in Albania and hides in snakes for 10 years. That happens because there are anchors. 6 pieces of him are sitting in 6 hiding places across Britain and Europe. The soul is already cracked. When the curse hits, the whole thing shears along those cracks. The body is destroyed, and the largest surviving fragment simply leaves. Take the anchors away, and the physics change completely. A whole soul does not shear. There is nothing for the crack to run along. When the rebounded curse hit Tom Riddle in that upstairs room, it hit one solid thing, and one solid thing does not shatter. It bends. It absorbs. It carries the damage in its own body, because there is nowhere else for the damage to go. His heart stopped for somewhere between 4 and 11 seconds. His sternum broke from the inside. The nerves down his right arm were burned along their length. His magic had taken 50 years to sharpen into the finest edge in Europe. The rebound knocked it so far out of true that for 2 years afterward he could not reliably light a candle. And then he stood up. That is the divergence. That is the whole thing. In one timeline, the curse kills the body and spares the fragment. In this one, it spares the body and ruins the man. The man walks out of the front door and down the lane past the church. Walking is all he has, because disapparating is beyond him, and because there is nowhere in the world for him to go. Watch what that does to the next 16 years. Madam Bagshot, said the chair, you have said the man walked toward the muggle end of the village. Did you follow? I am 107. You were 90 at the time. I was 90, and I was not a fool, said Batilda. I went across to the house. What did you find? The old woman's hands started folding again. James at the bottom of the stairs, Lily in the doorway of the small room, and the baby standing up in his cot with his hands on the rail, shouting. And there was a cut on his head that was bleeding into his eyebrow. She stopped. I picked him up. There was nobody else to do it. I sat on the floor with him for 40 minutes until the big one came on the motorbike. Sirius Black. Him. And after him, the great big fellow from the school. And after him, Albus. Marchbanks's quill stopped. Albus Dumbledore came to the house that night. He came at about 2 in the morning, said Batilda Bagshot. He knew me. I had known him since he was a boy. He sat on my step. He asked me to tell him exactly what I had seen 3 times over. The 3rd time, he asked me to stop at the part where the man came out of the door. And, said Marchbanks, and he asked me whether the man had walked. That is what he asked? That is the only thing he asked twice, said Batilda. Whether he walked, whether he was holding his hand, whether he looked back. Then he sat on my step for a very long time without saying anything. Then he said something I did not understand and went away. What did he say? Asked the chairwoman. Batilda Bagshot frowned at the middle distance of 1981. He said, Then there is nothing hidden anywhere, she said, and he was not happy about it. Statement 4, given under oath. Severus Snape was the only witness in the whole inquiry who asked to be heard in private, and the only one who was refused. In he came, wearing the same black as always. Name, position and address came out in 9 words. Then he stood in the box with his hands at his sides and waited, and something about the way he waited made the press benches go quiet without being told. Professor Snape, said Marchbanks, you were a Death Eater. I was. When did you leave? That depends on what you mean by leave. Do not be clever with me, Professor. I have been doing this since your grandmother was at school. Snape inclined his head very slightly. It was almost respect. I stopped believing in the summer of 1980, he said. I stopped acting on that belief in the autumn of 1981. There were 14 months in between. I have never found a good word for what I was during those 14 months. I've had 17 years to look. What changed that autumn? Said the chairwoman. I heard half a prophecy through a door, and I carried it to him like a dog carrying a stick. He said it plainly. No self-pity in it at all. That was the thing about him that people always got wrong. Nothing ever got softened by him, least of all about himself. Tell the inquiry what you did next. I asked him to spare her. Her being Lily Potter. Yes, not the child. Not the husband. Not at first, said Snape. I would like the record to be accurate. I asked for her. And then he asked me why. I told him. He listened. Marchbanks put down her quill. He listened, she repeated. That is what nobody believes, and it is what happened, said Snape. I want you to understand what you are dealing with. You have all spent 16 years imagining a screaming thing in a hood. I knelt on a floor in Wiltshire in October 1981 and made a request to a man who was calm and courteous and interested. Then came the questions. How old was she? Was she any good? When I said she was the best of her year at Charms, he said, then it is a waste, and he meant it. Waste offended him. And what did he say to your request? Said Marchbanks. He said yes. Somebody in the public benches made a noise of disgust. Marchbanks silenced them with one look. He gave you his word. He gave me his word, and he kept it, in the only sense that a man like that keeps anything. Snape's voice did not rise, it never rose. He told her to stand aside, 3 times. 3. He gave her 3 chances, and no other person in that house got one. And I have spent 17 years being told that he lied to me. There was never a lie in it anywhere. The letter of it was kept exactly. That is worse. Why is that worse, Professor? Because a liar can be despised, said Snape, and an honest monster has to be understood. Here is where I want to lean in, because this is the hinge of the entire episode, and it is easy to skim past. The version of Tom Riddle you know could not have had that conversation. There was no way for him to do it. By then, that man had cut himself into 6 pieces, and every cut had taken something with it. What was left was brilliant and fast. It was also completely unable to hold 2 thoughts about another human being at the same time. That version says yes to Snape and forgets it before the door closes. A promise made to a servant is not an object, and objects were most of what he still understood. A whole man remembers. A whole man keeps track of debts, because debts are useful, and because a reputation for keeping your word is the cheapest weapon on earth. So this Riddle told Lily Potter to stand aside, and he meant it. When she would not, he killed her without any pleasure at all. Afterwards he went back down and stood in the wreckage of the hall for 4 seconds and thought, that is a shame, that is not a softer villain. Please do not hear it as a softer villain. It is a villain who can be reasoned with. That means people will try. That means 16 years of somebody in a ministry corridor saying, but perhaps if we opened a channel? Professor Snape, asked Marchbanks, after Godric's Hollow, you went to Albus Dumbledore on the 2nd of November, and you told him everything. I told him what I had done. He already knew most of it. And what did he tell you? Snape was silent for long enough that the clerk looked up. He asked me a question about the burn. He said, explain. There was a report. An aura had found blood and skin on the floor of the nursery that was not the child's and not the mother's. Dumbledore had read it. There was one thing he asked. He asked whether the Dark Lord had ever, in my presence, touched anything he was afraid of. And your answer? My answer was no. Very little frightened him, and he touched nothing he was not obliged to touch. In other people's houses, he wore gloves. Why do you think? Dumbledore asked. At the time, I thought he was rambling, said Snape. He did that when he was upset, and he was upset that night in a way I never saw again. I was 21. I had just got the only person I ever cared about killed. There was no room in my head to wonder what an old man meant. And now, said Marchbanks, now I know exactly what he meant. I have known since the 9th of June, when the deposition was unsealed and read to me in a room upstairs. Snape's hands closed at his sides. He was establishing that the man had been made to bleed, and that nothing had come out of him except blood. Marchbanks leaned forward. Professor, I am going to ask you a question, and I want you to think before you answer it. I have thought about nothing else since the 9th of June, said Snape. If Albus Dumbledore had told you, in November 1981, that Tom Riddle was mortal and could be killed by any hand, what would you have done? The room waited. I would have found him, said Severus Snape. In what time? I do not know. 2 years? 5? I would have gone back to the ones who were still free. I would have let them believe I was still theirs. I would have followed the trail until it ended. And you would have killed him, said Marchbanks. Madam Chairman, said Snape, I would have done considerably worse than that. He was released 20 minutes later. Out he went through the public benches. Nobody spoke to him, and he looked at nobody. At the door he stopped. Harry Potter was still on the bench in the corridor with a cold sandwich in his pocket. They had never had a conversation that was not about a cauldron. Snape had made sure of that for 6 years, and Harry had helped, and neither of them had ever examined why. Potter, sir, they will ask you about the last thing he said. I know. Say it exactly, said Snape. Do not improve it. Do not make it mean more than it did. The whole country will be building something out of that sentence for the next 50 years, and you are the only person alive who can keep it the right shape. Harry looked up at him. Did you know my mum was good at charms? She was better than good, said Snape. She was the reason he stopped in the doorway. Then he was gone, with no explanation at all, and Harry sat down again and did not understand it for another 11 days. Statement 5. Given under oath. They brought the wand into courtroom 2 in a wooden case with a glass lid, carried by 2 aurors, and the entire room stood up without being asked to. Marchbanks let them stand. Then she said, sit down, all of you. It is a stick. They sat down. The tension broke. Afterwards, a great many people said that was the moment they decided they liked her. Garrick Ollivander was helped to the witness chair. Thin he had been before 96. Thinner now. 10 months in a cellar in Wiltshire will do that. Out of it had come a cough that never left. Out of it had also come a way of holding his hands as though they were still tied. Mr. Ollivander, said Marchbanks, you made that wand? In 1911, said Ollivander. I was young. It was one of my early ones. And I was very pleased with it, which is not a thing I say often about my early ones. Describe it. You. 13.5 inches. Core of phoenix feather. He paused. It sat in the drawer for 27 years, and every year I thought about taking it apart. Why did you not? Because a wand that will not sell is usually waiting, said Ollivander, and because the feather in it had a brother. That is the detail that fans of this world already know, and it is worth saying out loud anyway, because it becomes enormous later. The phoenix that gave the feather for the yew wand gave exactly one other. 2 feathers from one bird in one lifetime. That bird was Fawkes, and Fawkes lived on a perch in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. The second feather went into a wand of holly, 11 inches. It sat in the same drawer until the summer of 91. 2 wands, out of the same source, sold 53 years apart, to 2 boys, who both walked into that shop with nobody who loved them and no idea what they were. Mr. Ollivander, said Griselda Marchbanks, tell the inquiry about the sale. The 31st of August, 1938, said Ollivander. A boy from London, 11 years old, in a coat that had been somebody else's, brought in by a professor from the school. He held out his hand before I offered him anything, and I remember thinking, that is a customer who has decided to be good at this. Did he try many wands? Said Marchbanks. He tried one, said Ollivander. That has happened 4 times in my career. Twice it was a very great witch or wizard. Twice it was a disaster. Which was which? I only learned later. And what did he say when it chose him? Said the chair. The old wand-maker's hands moved in his lap. He asked me what it was for, said Ollivander. Not what it could do. What it was for. I told him that yew turns up in the hands of people who leave a mark on the world. I told him the phoenix feather is the least biddable core there is. I told him a phoenix wand will sometimes refuse to do a thing on principle. And, said Marchbanks, and he smiled. Then he said, I shall have to be very persuasive. Then he paid and left and did not thank me. Ollivander glanced at the case on the table. I did not sleep well that night. I have never known why. He was perfectly polite. Marchbanks moved on. The wand was recovered from the ruins at Godric's Hollow, asked the chairwoman, on the 3rd of November, 1981, by an auror named Dawlish, under a fallen beam in the upstairs room. And the ministry examined it, said Marchbanks. They performed the reverse spell effect on it, said Ollivander. Priori incantatem. It shows the last spells a wand has performed in reverse order, most recent first. It is not evidence in a court, because it can be defeated by a competent hand, but a wand lying under a beam for 3 days is nobody's competent hand. That reading was clean. You were present, said the chairwoman. I was asked to be there because they wanted to know how far back it could be pushed, and nobody else in Britain could tell them. How far back did it go? Said Marchbanks. 11 spells, said Ollivander. Before that, it thinned out into noise. Read them to the inquiry, please. Parchment rustled. There was something else in the room that afternoon too. It was the quiet of 200 people about to hear what happened inside a room that the whole country had imagined and nobody had seen. I will read them forward, said Ollivander. Backward is how the spell gives them, and forward is how a human being can bear them. Marchbanks nodded. First, an unlocking charm at the gate. It did not work, which tells us the gate was under a stronger protection than a simple lock. Second, a blasting curse. That is the front door. Third, the killing curse. James Potter had been standing at the foot of the stairs with no wand in his hand at all. That was in the Aura report from 1981, and it had been public since 1982, and it was the reason a whole generation of school children knew his name. Fourth, said Ollivander, a shield charm. Marchbanks's head came up. A shield! A shield, said Ollivander, cast by that wand in that house on that night. Against what? Against her, said Ollivander quietly. Lily Potter did not simply stand in a doorway and wait. She threw everything she had at him from the top of the stairs. It was good enough that he had to defend himself. There is a burn mark on the plaster of that stairwell to this day, and no charm has ever taken it out. I want to sit here for a second. In the story you know, Lily Potter's death is a still image. A woman in a doorway refusing to move, dying with her arms out. It is one of the most powerful things in the whole of that world, and I would not change a line of it. But in this timeline, the Ministry has a wand and a reading. The reading says there were 4 seconds in the middle of that night when the greatest duelist in Europe had to put up a shield in somebody's upstairs corridor. She did not manage a second one. She was 21 years old and she had been out of school for 3 years, and she made him work for it. That is not in any textbook. It is in a Ministry file that sat in a drawer for 16 years, because the file was about the wand, and nobody had ever thought to read it as a story. Continue, Mr. Ollivander. Fifth, a disarming charm. It worked. Her wand went out of the window, and it was found in the hedge in 1983 by a boy looking for a football. Sixth is the second killing curse. Nobody moved. Seventh, said Ollivander, is the third killing curse. That is the one aimed at the child. It is on the reading twice, because the wand cast it once and received it once. And that is a thing I had never seen and have not seen since. There is a mark in the U where it came back through. The wood is dead along an inch of the length. It will never take a polish there again. And after that, the wand did nothing for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The reading holds silences as gaps, and we can measure them. 2 minutes and 40 seconds, asked Marchbanks. He was on the floor, said Ollivander. That is the only reading of it. Nobody puts a wand down for 160 seconds in a room like that. Not unless he cannot pick it up. And the 8th spell, said Marchbanks. Garrick Ollivander looked at the case with the glass lid. The 8th spell, he said, is a summoning charm. A murmur ran round the benches. Marchbanks quieted it. Summoning what? The spell does not record the object. It records the shape of the want. Ollivander's voice had gone very careful. But I can tell the inquiry 2 things. The charm reached about 9 feet, which is a room's width and no more. And it failed. There was nothing in that room to come. What was in that room? A cot, a chest of drawers, a window, a dead woman, a living child. Then what was he reaching for? Said Marchbanks. That, said Ollivander, is the question I have carried for 17 years. My answer came this March, in a cellar, from a man who was drunk and boasting. Marchbanks put down her quill for the 2nd time that week. Go on, Mr. Ollivander. He was reaching for the cloak, said Garrick Ollivander, James Potter's invisibility cloak. And if you want to understand every single thing that man did for the following 16 years, that is where you begin. Not with the war, not with the child, with a broken man on a nursery floor, with his heart barely going, trying to steal a piece of cloth. Statement 6. Read into the record. The 6th witness never came to the Ministry because the sixth witness was a muggle, and because by the time anybody found her, she had already forgotten everything she had said. Her name was Enid Barnaby. She was 83. She lived in a bungalow in Cleethorpes with a cat called Mr. Wilkins. In April, 2 ministry officials had knocked on her door. They sat in her front room for 5 hours and drank 4 cups of tea. Then, they took down 11 pages of what she remembered about a lodger from a long time ago. Then, because that is the law, one of them had lifted the whole conversation out of her head and left her with a pleasant impression of having had a nice chat about the water rates. The one who had done the lifting was called Ada Fenwick. She was 34, she worked in the Obliviator headquarters, and she read the statement to the inquiry herself, because she had asked to. "I would like the record to show," she said, before she began, that Mrs. Barnaby was not confused and was not making it up. She had the dates, she had the rent book. I checked the rent book against the Register of Missing Persons and the sightings file, and everything she said held. "Noted," said Marchbanks. "Read it, please," said Griselda Marchbanks. So Ada Fenwick read out the statement of a woman who did not know she had given it, and Courtroom 2 heard about the 4 years that nobody in Wizarding Britain had ever accounted for. Number 11, Seaview Terrace, Grimsby. A boarding house with 6 rooms and a bathroom on the half landing, and a sign in the window that said vacancies. In March 1982, a man came to the door with no luggage and asked for a room at the back. The name he gave was Thomas Marks. A month went down up front, in old notes. Mrs. Barnaby remembered them because they were creased into quarters, as though they had been carried in a shoe. 35, she thought. Or 55? She had genuinely not been able to decide. Very tall, very thin, and moving like a man in pain who had decided not to show it. His left hand was scarred and he kept it in his pocket. His right arm shook if he held it out. He was the politest man I ever had in that house, the statement said, and I never once wanted to sit in a room with him. The rent book showed him there from March 1982 to September 1986. 4.5 years. Never a payment missed, never a payment early. Now, here is where I have to stop and say the thing out loud, because if I do not say it, the picture will not land. For 4.5 years, Lord Voldemort lived in a muggle boarding house in Lincolnshire and paid rent to a muggle woman and ate her cooking and said thank you for it. A whole life had gone into building a movement on the idea that these people were beneath him. He had killed for it. Others had killed for it on his orders. Then he was broken and hunted and could not hold a wand steady enough to boil a kettle. The only place on earth where nobody would ever look for him was a street of terraced houses. It was full of exactly the people he had promised to erase, and he knew it. That is the part that gets me. Every single day he knew it. For 4.5 years, and he stayed because staying alive mattered more. That is what mortality does to a man. It makes him choose. The version of him from the other timeline never had to choose anything in his life. How did he eat? Mending. That is how. Mrs. Barnaby's statement was very clear on this. Her lodger fixed clocks, then wirelesses, then a neighbour's toaster, then everything on the street with a spring in it. He charged very little and he was extremely good. The fine work went to his ruined left hand, braced against the table because the right one shook. He said the small work was the only thing that stopped his head, the statement said. I asked him what was in his head, and he said, an argument. I said, with who? And he said, with a man who is dead, and I did not ask again. A boy lived in that house, Mrs. Barnaby's son Colin, who was 9 in 1982 and who had a stammer, and who was having a bad time of it at school. Her lodger taught him chess. They played in the back room on Thursdays for 4 years. Mrs. Barnaby remembered standing in the doorway with a tea towel. She watched a man who frightened her sit perfectly still for 2 hours, while a 9-year-old worked out what to do about a bishop. Never once did he let the boy win. Not once. But he never finished a game quickly either, and every time Colin lost, the man would put the pieces back exactly where they had been 11 moves earlier, and say, from here, and they would play it again. He said the boy's stammer was a timing problem, not a talking problem, the statement said. He said chess would fix it, and it did. Colin runs a garage in Louth now. 3 girls, no stammer at all. I'm not going to pretend I know what to do with that. I have read a lot of theories about this timeline over the years, and the ones I find least convincing are the ones that make him warm. Warm, he was not. He taught that boy chess, because a man who has lost everything needs to prove his mind still works. A child is the safest opponent in the world. And Thursday evenings were 4 hours a month when he was not thinking about dying. But he did put the pieces back. 11 moves, every time. For 4 years. Hold that. It comes back. Did he ever leave the house? Marchbanks asked. Ada Fenwick turned a page. She says he went out on Tuesdays and came back with library books. She says he went away for 3 or 4 days, about twice a year, and would not say where. And she says that in the summer of '84, he came back from one of those trips at 3 in the morning. Blood was coming through his trousers. She found him on the stairs. Bleeding from what? Said Marchbanks. She did not know. She wanted to call an ambulance. That was refused. He asked for a needle and thread and did it himself, in the bathroom, with the door open. Sitting on the edge of the bath, she stood in the doorway the whole time in case he passed out. Did they speak? Said the chair. Yes, said Fenwick, and she read it out exactly. The lodger had said, without looking up, that he had gone to see a house. She had asked whose house, and he had said, my father's. She had asked if his father still lived there, and he had said, no. Then he had said something she never forgot. I made sure of that a long time ago, and it did not help. Mrs. Barnaby says he was crying, said Ada Fenwick. Not making any noise, just water running down his face, while he put stitches in his own leg. She says she has thought about it for 14 years, and she still does not know what she was looking at. The courtroom was completely silent. That trip was the summer of 1984. Little Hangleton, the gaunt shack in the wood on the hill, with the dead snake nailed to the door, where his mother's family had rotted out over 3 generations. Off he went on his own with a broken arm and no proper magic, and back he came at 3 in the morning, bleeding and weeping. We know what he was looking for now. We did not then. When did he leave? Asked Marchbanks. The 22nd of September, 1986. The rent went in to the end of the month, and on the 22nd he was gone. Was there a reason? She says the wireless had been on. There had been a news item. A body found in a reservoir in Yorkshire, and the police were treating it as suspicious. Fenwick looked up. That was Hepzibah Smith's old house elf, the one who came forward and then went missing. It is case 41 in the Aura file. So he ran, said Marchbanks. So he ran, and left everything he owned, and Mrs. Barnaby went up to clean the room. And what did she find? Asked the chairwoman. Ada Fenwick turned to the last page of the statement. Nothing, she said. That was what upset her. A bed, a chair, a table, and nothing. 4.5 years in that room, and he had not so much as scuffed the paint. She said it was like cleaning a room somebody had only ever thought about staying in. Nothing at all? One thing, said Fenwick. On the inside of the wardrobe door, low down, where you would only see it if you were kneeling to look for a lost sock. Scratched into the wood with something sharp, and gone over and over until it was deep. Describe it. A triangle, said Ada Fenwick, with a circle inside it, and a straight line down the middle, through both. Statement 7, entered as a sealed deposition. Albus Dumbledore had been dead for 11 months. Instructions had been left with Gringotts, which is a thing very few people bother to do. Gringotts do not care in the slightest who you were in life. On the 9th of June, a goblin named Grabhook broke the seal on a package. It had sat in Vault 704 since the 18th of December, 16.5 years earlier. Inside were 11 feet of parchment in a familiar looping hand. The instruction on the outside said, to be opened when the man is dead or when I am wrong, whichever comes first. Marchbanks had the clerk read it aloud. She did not read it herself, and afterwards people said that was because she could not have got through it, and I think that is probably true. It began without any greeting. If you are reading this, then Tom Riddle is dead, and I would very much like to know how long it took you. I am writing on the 18th of December, 1981, 7 weeks after Godric's Hollow. I've spent those 7 weeks travelling. I will tell you where I went and what I found. Then I will tell you what I have decided to do. Then you may think of me whatever you like, because I will not be there to argue. Bathilda Bagshot saw a man walk out of that house on his own feet. His left hand was held away from his body. Then came a look back at the door. Down the lane he went on foot, because apparating was beyond him. A man who cannot apparate at a moment like that is not a spirit, and is not a ghost. He is a wounded animal, walking away from a trap. That single fact undid 11 years of my thinking, and I would like to explain why. I have believed since 1943 that Tom Riddle intended to divide his soul. At 16, he asked a member of my staff a question about it, and the answer he received was more helpful than it should have been. Everything he did afterwards, every theft, every murder that made no strategic sense, every heirloom he collected, I read as preparation. I was extremely pleased with myself for reading it that way. So, on the 3rd of November I went to look. There is a house in a wood above Little Hangleton where his mother's family lived. There is a floorboard under the window and a box beneath it. I found the box. It contained a gold ring with a black stone, and the ring carried a curse of the ordinary and vicious sort that any competent dark wizard could have laid. And it carried nothing else. Nothing was hidden inside it. I have held objects with a piece of a person in them, and there is no mistaking the weight. This was an old ring in a rotten house. There is a cave on the coast where he took 2 children from an orphanage when he was 11 in order to frighten them. I went there on the 11th of November. I opened the wall. Behind it there is a lake and an island and a great deal of stone, and the stone is exactly as the sea left it. Nothing has been carved, nothing has been sunk. No hand has arranged that place for anything. I went to the last known address of Hepzibah Smith. She died in 1946 of what was recorded as accidental poisoning. Her 2 finest pieces went missing on the day of her death, a cup and a locket. Both objects are gone, and both objects have been gone for 35 years. But here is what I learned. In 1952, a locket answering that description was sold in Knockturn Alley by a man who had it from a burglary. In 1961, a gold cup answering that description was bought by a collector in Vienna. The man still has it. He was kind enough to let me hold it. It is a cup, so he sold them. Do you understand what I am telling you? 2 priceless objects were stolen, kept for 6 years, and sold for money, which is what a young man with no fortune and expensive plans does with stolen goods. Anchors were never what he was building. It was a movement, and a movement needs capital. There is no piece of Tom Riddle hidden anywhere in Britain. There is no piece of him hidden anywhere in the world. He is one man, entire, and he always has been. And the reason he survived the 31st of October is not that he had made himself immortal. It is that he had not. The clerk stopped there for a moment because the noise in the courtroom made going on pointless. Marchbanks let it run for a full minute before she called order. I've thought a great deal about the physics of it, and I offer this as a guess and nothing more. A curse of that kind, turned back, must go somewhere. Into a divided soul, it goes along the divisions, and the body is lost. Into an undivided one, there is nowhere for it to run, and so it stays in the flesh, and the flesh takes all of it. The boy's mother made that rebound possible. I want that written down somewhere, permanent. She was given a choice and she refused it. And refusing it is what armed the thing that nearly killed him. So he lives. What he was, he is no longer. Bathilda's account, the oral report on the blood, and the state of the wand all say the same thing. The use of one hand is gone, and a good deal of the other arm. I strongly suspect he has lost most of his control as well. A man like that cannot fight. Leading is beyond him. For some years he cannot even be seen. And now I come to the part you have opened this for. And he can be killed. Any aura, any shopkeeper with a clear line and a steady hand, any farmer with a shotgun, if he stands in the wrong lane at dusk, I am not going to tell anyone. There was no sound at all in courtroom 2. I will set out my reasons plainly, and I will not dress them up, because I have watched myself dress things up for 100 years, and I am tired of it. The first reason is arithmetic. Suppose I stand up tomorrow and tell 30,000 frightened people the truth. That the man who has been killing them for 11 years is a sick man in a coat. That anybody at all could finish him. Then 30,000 people go looking. They will not find him. Not being found is something he is far better at than they are at looking. What they will find is tall, thin men in coats, in lanes, at dusk. I put the likely number of innocent dead at somewhere between 2 and 20. I would like the record to show what the true figure turned out to be, and I would like whoever reads this to be honest about whether I was right. Kingsley Shacklebolt was sitting in the second row, not a movement in him anywhere. 3, he thought. It was 3. The second reason is his people. At this moment, his followers believe he has been destroyed, and half of them have gone home, and the other half are lying to the Wizengamot about enchantments they were never under. If they learn instead that he is alive and broken, they will not scatter. They will go and find him, and they will put him back together. And they have money, and there are healers who can be bought. The third reason is the one I am ashamed of, so I will state it last, and clearly. Sooner or later, he will come out of hiding. Not for power, not for revenge. He will come out because of a shelf in the Department of Mysteries. There is a small glass ball on it. That ball carries his name and a boy's name, and it holds the only sentence in the world that suggests he has a limit. A man who cannot make himself immortal will spend the rest of his life trying to find out how he dies. There is no help for it in him. It is the only subject he has ever really had. So I'm going to leave the ball on the shelf. I'm going to say nothing. For the next 15 years, I shall be unhelpful to the ministry and evasive with my friends. I shall also be cruel to a small boy in Surrey, whose whole life I am arranging around a trap set for a man in a coat. And come to the shelf, he will. And when he does, he will be in a room I have chosen, with people I have placed. After 15 years, he will be a mortal man standing in the open. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm spending a country's peace of mind and a child's childhood, and however many lives the arithmetic takes, in order to buy one afternoon. I've made this kind of decision before. It went very badly. I have not become better at it. I've only become better at explaining it, which is worse. Sign here. Albus Percival Wulfric, Brian Dumbledore. And know this, if the document is being read aloud, the odds are extremely good that I was wrong about something and that somebody in that room paid for it. The clerk lowered the parchment, and this is the point where the timeline you know stops being any use to you at all, because everything from here runs on one fact that nobody in Britain had except a dead man. Statement 8, Aura Shacklebolt. Recalled? They brought Kingsley Shacklebolt back on the Thursday morning, and this time the room was so full that people were sitting on the steps. The whole country had read the Dumbledore deposition by then. It had run in the paper across 4 pages, and there had already been 2 resignations, and somebody had thrown paint at the statue in the atrium. Aura Shacklebolt, said Marchbanks, the 24th of June, 1994. Yes, ma'am, begin wherever you like. I will begin with a gardener, said Kingsley. His name was Frank Bryce, 76 years old with a bad leg from the war. For the better part of 50 years, he had been the caretaker of the big empty house on the hill above Little Hangleton. The village had believed for half a century that he had murdered the family who used to live there, on the grounds that somebody must have, and nobody else was handy. On the 22nd of June, he rang the police and told them a light was on in the old house. The police told him to go back to bed. That should have been the end of it. It was not the end of it. A young woman in the Muggle liaison office had a standing charm on 11 addresses in Britain, and the Riddle house was one of them. Whenever a Muggle report mentioned it by name, a slip of paper appeared in a tray on her desk. She brought it to me at 4 p.m. on the 24th, said Kingsley. I looked at it for about 9 seconds. Then I went. Alone, said the chairwoman. Alone. Why alone, said Marchbanks. Because I had taken 12 auras to a false sighting in March, said Kingsley. One of them was badly hurt in a garden by a hex laid by a frightened old woman. And because I had a rule. If it was going to be nothing, it would be nothing on my time. He arrived at 9:30, with the light going. There was nobody in the house. All 16 rooms were empty. The dust on the stairs had not been walked on since about 1990. Out he came, through the front door, annoyed with himself, and started down the hill. That was when he saw the churchyard. A lamp was burning in it, not a wand light. An old brass storm lamp, standing on a flat stone, and beside it, kneeling on a folded coat in the wet grass, a man was cleaning a gravestone with a wire brush. Describe him, asked Marchbanks. Very tall, very thin, grey hair, cut badly, by himself I should think, old work trousers, his left hand was in a fingerless glove and he was doing the brushing with it, and his right hand was flat on the ground, holding him up. And you knew, said Marchbanks. I knew in about a second and a half, said Kingsley. I have never been so certain of anything in my life before or since. And then I spent the next 11 minutes making myself uncertain, because certain is not a thing you're allowed to be about a man who is dead. He had his wand out. It stayed out the whole time. 40 feet away, behind a yew tree, he stood without moving. The man on the ground kept brushing. The stone said Tom Riddle. It also said, underneath, 2 other names and dates that all ended in the same year, 1943. He was cleaning his father's grave, said Marchbanks. He was cleaning all 3 of them, said Kingsley. The father and both grandparents. The whole thing got done. Moss out of the letters, the lot. It took him the better part of 40 minutes and he did it properly. The way you do a job you intend to come back and inspect. Did you challenge him? Said Marchbanks. Eventually. What did you say? Kingsley Shacklebolt looked at the floor of the witness box. I said, do not move. I said my name and my office. That is what the training tells you to do, and I have thought about it every day since. And what did he do? Said Griselda Marchbanks. He said, good evening, Aura Shacklebolt, and carried on brushing. The courtroom did not make a sound. Now, I have told a lot of these stories, and I want to be honest with you about something. The scene I am about to describe is the one that made me want to build this whole episode. It is the exact opposite of what a confrontation with this man is supposed to look like. There was no duel, there were no wands, just a middle-aged aura in the rain and a grey man on his knees in the grass, and they talked for 11 minutes. And at the end of it, the aura walked away. And the terrible thing, the thing that took me a long time to accept, is that he was right too. He asked me to think about my position, said Kingsley. Those were his words. Think about your position, Aura. Not in a taunting way. He sounded like a man explaining a timetable. Explaining what? Everything I had not had time to work out. Kingsley's voice was very level, which is how you could tell. He said, you have found a man in a churchyard. You have no warrant because you came alone. You have no witness. If you kill me, you will have killed an unarmed elderly man on consecrated ground with no order from your office. You will be tried for it, and your defence will be that he was somebody the ministry has spent 13 years calling a bodiless spirit. And that was true, said Marchbanks. Every word of it was true, ma'am. That is the point. There was no lie in it. Not one. At any point. Did you consider taking him? I considered it for the whole 11 minutes. Why did you not? Because of the second thing he said? Marchbanks waited. He said, and if you did kill me, what exactly do you imagine that would achieve? Kingsley stopped. I want the inquiry to understand, he said. In June of '94, I believed something, and every trained aura in this building believed it with me. It was written in the Standing Operational Guidance, which I had helped to write. The man could not be destroyed by any means known to us. That was doctrine. It was doctrine because in 1981, he had taken a rebounded killing curse and walked out of a house. Nothing survives that. Therefore, he was not a thing that could be killed. Therefore, killing him was not an available action, and capturing him was a fantasy, and the only thing on the table was intelligence. So you traded? So I traded. With Lord Voldemort, said the chair. With a man on his knees in a graveyard? Yes, ma'am. What did you get? Kingsley reached into his robes again, and this time what he brought out was small. A single folded square of parchment, soft at the creases. He gave me a place and a date, he said. The 7th of July, 1994. The reservoir at Barrow Hill, and the words, 9 of Yaxley's. Half of them not his. That is all it said. It went on the back of a seed packet in pencil. And, said Marchbanks, and on the 6th of July, we arrested 9 men at a farmhouse, 2 miles from Barrow Hill. They had enough dark material to poison the water for a town of 11,000 people. Kingsley put the parchment down on the ledge in front of him. Nobody died. Nobody has ever known why the raid happened. I wrote it up as an anonymous tip because it was. Why would he give you his own people? Because they were not his people, said Kingsley. That is what the second half of the note means. Yaxley had gone freelance and had started something my witnesses could have traced back to him. Being traced was the one thing he would not have. He handed me 9 men the way you hand a dog a bone, to get it away from the table. And in exchange, you let him walk out of that churchyard, asked the chairwoman. In exchange, I let him walk out of that churchyard. How did it end? Kingsley Shacklebolt was quiet for a long moment. He finished the last stone, he said. He stood up, which took him a while. Up came the coat, and he shook the water off it. Then came the thing I have never been able to explain to anybody, which was, he nodded at the graves and he said, they were nothing at all, you know, 3 of the stupidest people who ever lived. And I said, then why are you cleaning them? And he said, because there is nobody else to do it. The clerk's quill scratched and stopped. And then he told me not to report the sighting, said Kingsley. He said, you will not tell them you saw me, not because I am asking, because they will not believe you and it will ruin you. And I would rather you kept your job. Did you report it? I reported it the same night in writing to the head of the Auror office and to the minister. And the minister asked me whether I'd been drinking, said Kingsley Shacklebolt. And the file was marked unsubstantiated. It went in the drawer with the other 4,000. 11 months later, I was passed over for promotion for the first time in my career. Marchbank set her quill down very carefully. Auror Shacklebolt. Suppose you had known what Albus Dumbledore knew on that evening in that churchyard. What would you have done? I would have killed him where he knelt, said Kingsley, and I would have slept fine. Statement 9. Given under oath, under caution. Narcissa Malfoy testified in exchange for nothing at all, which surprised everybody, including her lawyer. She was 43. Her husband was in a holding cell 4 floors down and would be for some time. Her son was 19 and had been cleared of everything by a panel that had listened to him for 6 hours and then not known where to look. She wore grey. She sat very straight and answered every question exactly. And when she did not know a thing, she said so. The newspapers spent a week trying to decide whether they were allowed to be impressed. Mrs. Malfoy, said Marchbanks. When did he come back? The 4th of January, 1989. You are certain of the date. It was my sister Andromeda's birthday, said Narcissa. I had been thinking about her all day, which I had no business doing. Then the drawing room door opened and a man was standing in it. Describe what you saw, said the chairwoman. An old man in a wet coat holding the door frame. You knew him? Not for about 4 seconds, said Narcissa. Then he spoke. She stopped, and for the first time her voice did something. He said, Good evening, Mrs. Malfoy. Forgive the hour. And I put my glass down so hard the stem came off in my hand. I have the scar. She turned her palm over, and there was a small white line across the base of the thumb, and every quill in the press benches moved at once. What did he want? Dinner, said Narcissa. He asked for dinner. He had walked from the village. And your husband? Lucius came in 20 minutes later and went the colour of the tablecloth. Then he did the thing I've thought about every day for 9 years. She paused. He knelt down on the carpet in front of a man who had just eaten 2 helpings of soup because he was hungry. And how did your guest respond? He asked him to get up, said Narcissa Malfoy. He said, Please do not. The floor is cold and you are not 11. Here is what I think is the most under-discussed thing about this whole timeline, and I want to put it plainly before we go on. The version of this man that everybody imagines rules by terror, and terror is expensive. Terror means you have to keep proving it. It means the display in the drawing room, the punishment in front of the others, the body on the floor as a lesson. In the timeline, you know, he spends an enormous amount of his time and his people's lives on that, because a soul in 7 pieces cannot hold on to anybody any other way. This one did almost none of it. Back he came to a room of frightened rich people, an old man in a wet coat, pretending to be nothing else. Inside 4 years he had more of Britain under his hand than the other version managed in 11, because he was not offering them a monster to hide behind. What he offered them was a plan. Mrs. Malfoy, said Marchbanks, there is an account given to this inquiry on Tuesday by your husband of an incident in the spring of that year. I would like your version of it. Narcissa's chin came up very slightly. The greenhouse, she said. Yes. There were 6 of them there: Lucius, Yaxley, my brother-in-law, 2 others, and a man from Kent, whose name I will not give because his daughter is 8. She folded her hands. They had spent the winter deciding that he was finished, and he knew it, because he always knew everything. So he called them to the long greenhouse at Malfoy Manor at 4 in the afternoon, and he asked Lucius to curse him. To curse him! He said, "You all want to know what I am now. Ask properly." Lucius said something about not understanding. Then he said, "No, I am asking you to hex me, Lucius, and you may choose the hex." "Did he do it?" asked Marchbanks. "Not for a long time," said Narcissa. "Nobody moved for about 2 minutes. Then he said, 'If you make me ask a 3rd time, we will find out what I still have.' And Lucius raised his wand and used a cutting curse." "And?" said Marchbanks. "And it worked," said Narcissa Malfoy. "It opened him from the shoulder to the elbow. No shield went up, no stagger. He stood and let it bleed down his sleeve onto the flagstones. Then he looked at all 6 of them. Then he said, 'That hurt a very great deal, and I would like you all to be quite clear that it did.'" The room was silent. Then he said, "I am a man. There is no trick. Any one of you could do what Lucius has just done, only harder, and there would be no coming back from it. If that is the arrangement you would prefer, I suggest you make it now, while my arm is open." "And nobody moved," said Marchbanks. "Nobody moved. Why not?" "Because of what he said next," said Narcissa. "He said, 'I have been wrong twice in 50 years. You have been wrong twice this month. That is the whole of it. That is why you will do as I tell you.' And there it is. That is the sentence that ran the Second War. Not fear of a thing that could not be killed. Fear of being outthought by somebody who could. It is a far more stable kind of power, and it is a far more frightening one, and it is the reason this war did not look like a war at all." "Describe what the movement did," said Marchbanks. "Very little that you could arrest anybody for," said Narcissa. "That was the instruction. There were no marches. There was no killing without a written reason. He said, in front of me, that a murder is a report, and a report is a file, and a file is a rope. Then what did they do? They bought things," said Narcissa Malfoy. "Appointments, debts, a newspaper in 1990 through 4 other people, 2 seats on the Wizengamot in 92, 3 departmental undersecretaries, the Committee on Experimental Charms, which sounds like nothing and controls every licence in the country, and a great deal of law." "Which law?" "The Registration Act of 93, the Emergency Powers of 95, the Provisional Guardianship Order." She looked at the benches. "Every one of those was passed by this body, by open vote, and I am not aware that a single member of it was under an enchantment. You may make of that what you like. You could have heard a pin drop in courtroom 2. I said at the start that this war did about 1/5 of the damage of the other one. That is true. And it is also the least comforting fact in this entire story, because he did not do less. What he did was different. In the timeline, you know, he takes the ministry in an afternoon with a coup and a corpse, and everybody can see it happening, and everybody knows exactly which side they are on. In this one, he took it over 8 years, by committee, with paperwork, and there was never a single morning when the country woke up and said, right, it has started. That is the thing that people who lived through it still cannot explain to their children. There was no start. "Mrs. Malfoy," said Griselda Marchbanks, "you said he was never wrong. I said he had been wrong twice. Did you ever see him frightened?" Narcissa Malfoy thought about that for a long time. "Once," she said. "When?" "The 11th of August, 1995. My son had come home from his 4th year with a great deal to say about Harry Potter, most of it tedious. At dinner, he mentioned in passing that Potter had an invisibility cloak, that Potter's father had had it before him, and that a boy in his year had seen the inside of it, and it was worn through nowhere at all. And our guest put down his knife," said Narcissa, "and he asked Draco to say it again, and Draco said it again. Then came the question of how old the cloak was. Draco did not know. Draco was sent to fetch the school photographs from 1976 to see whether it was in any of them." "What did you see in his face?" said Marchbanks. "I saw a man doing arithmetic. He had done before and hoping for a different answer, said Narcissa Malfoy. And then I saw him get it, and it was the same answer. He went out into the garden and stood in the dark for 2 hours. Did he explain? He explained nothing to me. Lucius got a great deal of explanation that night. Lucius came to bed at 4 a.m. with a children's book in his hand and would not tell me why. What book? The Tales of Beedle the Bard, said Narcissa. Open at the story about the 3 brothers. Statement 10. Given under oath with a healer present. Broderick Bode gave his evidence, sitting down with a healer from St. Mungo's on a chair beside him, and he took a long time over every answer. That was not nerves. Broderick Bode had worked in the Department of Mysteries for 26 years. Nerves had gone out of him a long time before. It was because a piece of his mind had been taken out in 1995 and grown back crooked, and words now had to be looked for. Mr. Bode, said Marchbanks, we can adjourn at any point. I would rather not, ma'am. I have been waiting 3 years to say this to somebody with the power to write it down. Then begin with 1995, said the chair. In 1995, said Bode, somebody put me under the Imperious Curse in a lift. Do you know who? No. I know it was between the 2nd and 3rd of March. I know it was done well because I noticed nothing at all, and I am trained to notice. And what were you made to do? Said Marchbanks. I was made to go to the Hall of Prophecy on the 9th of March. I was to take a small glass sphere off shelf 97 and carry it out of the building. Did you succeed? Asked the chairwoman. No, said Broderick Bode. I got my hand around it, that is all. And then? And then it stopped being my hand, he said. I do not know a better way to describe it. A prophecy on those shelves can be lifted by the people it is about, and by nobody else. If anybody else takes hold of one, something in the room objects. I spent 4 months in a bed on the 4th floor at St. Mungo's not knowing my own name. I got it back in July. I got most of the rest back over the next 2 years. I'm told I will not get all of it. I'm sorry, Mr. Bode. So am I, ma'am. Marchbanks looked down at her notes. You are here because of what happened 15 months later. Yes, the night of the 18th of June, 1996. Yes, ma'am. You were on duty. I was on light duties, said Bode, which meant they let me sit in the time room and check the sand. There is a machine in there. It matters that somebody looks at it. That is all I am permitted to say about it. Tell the inquiry what happened, said Marchbanks. Broderick Bode put his hands flat on his knees. That was a thing he had learned to do in St. Mungo's, when a memory was coming. At 1:20 in the morning, he said, the black door at the end of the entrance chamber opened. A man came through it who had not been let in by anybody. How did he get in? Said the chairwoman. I have no idea, and neither does the department. And we have looked. The lifts were quiet. The atrium wards were untouched. The visitor register has nothing. He was simply on the wrong side of a door that has never once been opened from the outside since I started there. Describe him. Tall, old, very thin, a grey coat that had been mended at the elbow. In his hand was a storm lamp, which is against every regulation in the building, and it was the lamp that told me he was not one of us. None of us carry lamps. We have wands. What did you do? I stood up, said Bode, and he said, please sit down. I am not here for the time room. Now, before we go into that corridor, I need to tell you what he had spent the previous 4 years doing. Otherwise, this chapter is just a strange old man in a ministry basement. For 4 years he had been hunting the Deathly Hallows. 3 objects out of a children's story. A wand that wins. A stone that brings back the dead. A cloak that hides you from everything, including, if you believe the story, from death himself. Most wizards think it is a nursery tale. A significant minority think the cloak part is history and the rest is decoration. Almost nobody goes looking. Looking is exactly what he did, because every other door had shut. Think about where he stood in 1992. Splitting himself was closed to him. At 16, he had decided against it. By now, he was 65 years old, and there was not enough left of his magic to attempt it, even if he had changed his mind. In 84, he had gone back to the shack above Little Hangleton, hunting the one family heirloom that might have been more than an heirloom. The floorboard was up. The box was empty. Sitting in that filthy room, he had understood that somebody had been there first. That is what he was crying about on Enid Barnaby's stairs, not his father. the empty box. So the Hallows were what remained. The stone had gone into a ring, and the ring had gone somewhere, and he suspected exactly where. The cloak had gone into the Potter family. Once, with his heart stopping, he had reached for it and missed by 9 feet. And the wand was in the hand of the only man in Europe he had never been willing to fight. 3 objects. All 3 had been missed by a matter of inches and chased ever since. By June of 96, he was 69 years old. His kidneys were failing, and he had begun to wonder about something else. "He walked past the Hall of Prophecy," said Marchbanks. "He walked past the door of it," said Bode. "I was behind him by then. I had my wand out, and he knew it, and it did not appear to trouble him. He stopped at that door for perhaps 4 seconds. He did not go in?" asked Marchbanks. "No, ma'am." "Why not?" "He told me why not," said Broderick Bode. "He said, 'Without turning round, there is a sentence in there with my name in it, and I cannot pick it up.' Then he said, 'I have tried 3 times through other hands and the room breaks them.' He said, 'I am sorry about your hand, by the way.' Then he walked on." The clerk stopped writing for a second and then caught up. "Where did he go?" "To the death chamber. That is a real room. It sits at the bottom of a stone amphitheatre, sunk into the floor of the Department of Mysteries. In the middle there is a raised dais. On the dais stands an arch of old stone with a ragged veil hanging in it. Nobody built it. It was there before the ministry was, and the ministry was built around it because moving it was not possible. Things that go through it do not come out. Some people can hear voices on the other side of it and some people cannot. And there is no rule about who is which." "He went down the steps to the dais," said Bode. "He put the lamp on the stone. Then he stood in front of the veil and looked at it. And that went on for a very long time." "How long?" 38 minutes, ma'am. I know because I was counting to keep myself steady." "Did he speak?" "He asked me questions," said Broderick Bode. "What questions?" "He asked whether anything had ever come back through. I said no. Then he asked whether we had tested it. I said yes, extensively. He asked what with, and I told him. And back came the word cruel. And I said, yes, it was. Anything else? He asked me whether I could hear them. And could you? Yes, said Bode. And could he? Broderick Bode was quiet for a moment. No, he said. And it took me until about the 30th minute to understand that this was the entire reason he had come. What he wanted to know was whether he could hear them. 38 minutes he stood there, with his head on one side. He was like a man at a door, listening for somebody moving about upstairs. There was nothing, and it was killing him. Did he say so? He said one thing at the end. Then he said, "They told me it is the only certain thing." It was said to himself, not to me. And then he picked up his lamp, climbed the steps, and left the building the same way he came in. Marchbanks put down her quill. Mr. Bode. He was alone, unguarded, in a ministry building with an armed unspeakable behind him for 38 minutes. Yes, ma'am. Why did you not act? Said Marchbanks. Because I had been told my whole career that he could not be killed, said Broderick Bode. And because I was 40 seconds walk from a room that had already eaten 4 months of my life. And because he had his back to me the entire time. Nobody on this earth turns their back on an armed man unless he knows something you do not. And did he know something you did not? He knew everything I did not, ma'am. That was always the arrangement. Marchbanks closed her notes. One final question. Did he go through the veil? He stood in front of it for 38 minutes, said Broderick Bode, and he stayed on this side of it. Why not? Said Marchbanks. I have thought about it for 2 years, said Bode, and the only answer I have is the one he gave, and he never meant it as an answer. It is the only certain thing. Everything else he had ever chased was a maybe. The stone was a maybe, and the wand was a maybe, and splitting himself was a maybe. He had refused when he was 16. That arch was not a maybe, and he could not do it, because it went the wrong way. Statement 11, given under oath. Minerva McGonagall was the only witness. The whole room stood up, for who told them to sit down before Marchbanks could. She had been headmistress since the previous summer. She had not wanted the job and had said so at the funeral, out loud, to about 400 people, and it had made her more popular than 39 years of Transfiguration ever managed. Professor McGonagall, said Marchbanks, the inquiry would like to know what the last 7 years were like inside the school. Quiet, said McGonagall. Quiet, that is the word I have chosen, and I have thought about it. Nobody attacked us. Nobody besieged us. No battle in the Great Hall. No bodies in the courtyard. Ask a child in my school what the war was, and most of them would look at you blankly. Her mouth was a thin line. And I lost 19 students. The clerk's quill stopped. Lost how? Not to curses, said McGonagall. To paperwork. She said it exactly like that. And it went round the country in a day. Explain, please. The Muggle-born Registration Act of 1993, said McGonagall. You passed it. Not you personally, Griselda. I know how you voted. This body passed it. It required every student of Muggle parentage to hold a registration card and to have that card countersigned annually by a wizarding householder of good standing. For their protection, said Marchbanks. That is what the preamble said, yes. And in practice? In practice, a child of 11 had to find a stranger to vouch for her existence, said McGonagall. And in practice, the list of householders of good standing was kept by a committee. By 95, that committee had 4 members, and 3 of them were his. And the 19 students, said Griselda Marchbanks. 9 had their registration refused and were removed from the school by the department under a provisional guardianship order. 6 left the country with their families. 3 went into hiding with their parents, and I do not know where they are. 1 died, said McGonagall, of a heart condition, in a ministry waiting room, in March of 96, at the age of 13, while her mother argued about a form. Marchbanks did not say anything for a while. Her name, Professor? Ivy Cobbett, said Minerva McGonagall, second-year Hufflepuff. She was extremely good at herbology, and she had a very silly laugh. I would like that on the record. It is on no other record. That was the point of the exercise. I want to stop here, because this is where this timeline stops being a thought experiment and becomes the thing I actually wanted to talk about. Everybody who tells this story wants the big version. The armies, the siege, the wands in the courtyard, the boy walking into the forest. I love that story. I have told it more times than I can count. But take the anchors away and give the man his whole mind back. And he does not want the big version, because the big version gets him killed. What he wants is a country that changes shape slowly enough that nobody has to decide anything. And the horrifying part, the part that keeps me up, is that it works better. Fewer people died in 16 years of this than died in 2 years of the other one. Ask any historian and the numbers are not close. And a 13-year-old girl died in a waiting room about a form. And nobody in the ministry ever went to prison for it, because nobody had done anything you could point at. That is what a whole soul buys you. Not mercy, patience. Professor, said Marchbanks, the inquiry has heard evidence about the treatment of Harry Potter. I would like your account. McGonagall's hands closed on the rail of the witness box. I found out in 1994, she said. Found out what? That there had been a member of the oral office inside my school since 92, under a false name, in a post I'd been told was a temporary secondment, whose actual job was to be within 100 yards of one boy at all times and to file a report every night. And you objected, said the chair. I went to the Minister of Magic, and I used language I have not used since the war before this one, said McGonagall, and he explained to me, very patiently, that the boy was an asset. Did you tell Harry, said Marchbanks. No. Why not? Because Albus asked me not to, said Minerva McGonagall, and because I was fool enough to think he had a reason. The reason existed. I have read it now, along with the rest of you, on page 7, in his own handwriting. It was a bad reason, and he knew it was a bad reason when he wrote it down. That is the only thing I have ever found in his favour on this subject. You are angry with him? Asked the chairwoman. I am furious with him, and he is dead, and there is nowhere to put it. She stopped. You may write that down. I have said it at his portrait twice. The portrait agrees with me, which is somehow worse. Marchbanks moved on, because she was kind, and because she had known Albus Dumbledore for 100 years herself. Professor, there were 4 interviews a year with the Department of Mysteries. There were. Did you attend them? From 1995, I attended every single one, said McGonagall. I sat at the end of the table and said nothing, and I wrote down every question they asked. The 9th time they asked him whether he had ever dreamed of a corridor, I began to cough at exactly the right moments. Somebody in the public benches laughed. This time, Marchbanks let it run. And what did those interviews establish? Nothing, said McGonagall. There was nothing to establish. The boy had a scar and a great deal of trouble sleeping. The trouble sleeping was because he was 15 and being interviewed 4 times a year by a man in a grey robe who would not tell him why. Did anything good come out of those years, Professor? Said Marchbanks. Minerva McGonagall took the question seriously. She had clearly decided not to give a comfortable answer just because one was wanted. One thing, she said, Peter Pettigrew. Explain. In November 1995, the department picked up a man in Wigtown, trying to sell information about the movement. A small man, and not important, and they nearly let him go. A junior Auror recognised the missing finger. Sirius Black, said the chairwoman. Sirius Black was tried on the 9th of February 96, said McGonagall, for the first time 13 years late, acquitted on all counts in under 4 hours, and the Wizengamot of this country then sat there and was told by its own clerk that no record of any previous trial existed because there had not been one. And the effect on Harry Potter, said Marchbanks. The effect on Harry Potter, said Minerva McGonagall, was that in the summer of 96, he went to live in a house in London with his godfather. In August, I received a letter from him. It was 4 pages long and entirely about a kitchen. She stopped and cleared her throat and went on in exactly the same dry voice. He had helped to paint it. The paint took up a great deal of it. Painting was not among his gifts, and there had been an argument about the colour with a young lady called Miss Granger, who had produced a chart. Mr. Weasley had taken no side on the grounds that he wished to continue eating in that kitchen, and Sirius Black had let the 3 of them do all of it. The entire day had gone by with him sitting on the stairs watching them, which his portrait, and here she stopped and corrected herself sharply, which he told me afterwards was the best day he had ever had. Marchbanks let a moment go by. Professor McGonagall, is Sirius Black alive? He is sitting in the 3rd row, Griselda. Every day of this inquiry, that is where he has been. If you turn round, he will wave at you. And here is the small, quiet gift in the middle of this very bleak story. I am going to let myself enjoy it for 1 paragraph. In the timeline, you know, Sirius Black dies in June 1996 in the death chamber because Tom Riddle put a false picture into a boy's head and the boy believed it. There is no connection here. There never was. There was never anything in Harry's head to push a picture into. So no vision came, so no rescue was mounted. So 6 people never went into the Department of Mysteries that night at all. The man in the grey coat went in on his own and listened at a curtain for 38 minutes and heard nothing. And Sirius Black spent that night asleep in a house in Islington with a paint tin on the landing. Professor, said Marchbanks eventually, we come to June 1997. The room changed temperature. Yes, said Minerva McGonagall. You were the last person to speak to Albus Dumbledore. I was the second to last. Who was the last? His brother, said McGonagall. And I would ask the inquiry to be gentle with him. He has been carrying it on his own since. He is not a gentle man, and he has nowhere to put it either. Statement 12. Given under oath, unwillingly. Aberforth Dumbledore had to be served with a summons, and when the clerk brought it, he read it, folded it into 4, and used it to level a wobbling table. Come he did, in a coat that smelled of goats. The oath he refused 3 times, until somebody found him a form of words he would accept. Then he sat down in the witness chair like a man sitting down in a dentist's. Mr. Dumbledore, asked Marchbanks. Aberforth, you keep the Hog's Head Inn in Hogsmeade. 61 years. On the night of the 29th of June, 1997. What happened in your bar? My brother died in it, said Aberforth. Anything else you want? You will have to drag out of me. I have not talked about it, and I do not intend to start enjoying it now. Marchbanks, who was 111 and had been threatened by better men, simply waited. Aberforth waited too. Then he gave in, the way people always did with her. He came in at 2:10 in the morning, he said. My brother, I mean. 9 years it had been since he was last in my pub. He sat at the end and asked for a brandy and did not drink it. Was he well? Said Marchbanks. He was dying and had been for a year. How do you know? Because his hand had gone black to the wrist and a glove was over it in June, said Aberforth. You do not need to be a healer. Do you know the cause? He put a ring on. When? August 96. A reason existed and he gave it to me. And I am not going to tell you because it is nobody's business and it is not about the war. Aberforth's jaw set. It is about our sister. Leave it there. Marchbanks inclined her head and left it there. And that, more than anything else she did in 3 months, is why people still talk about that inquiry with respect. Continue, please, said Marchbanks. He said, Ab, I have made a mistake that will take somebody 16 years to clean up. And I would like to clean up as much of it as I can before Thursday. Aberforth's mouth twisted. That was how he apologised. He never once managed the word. Did he tell you what he intended? He told me he had sent a letter. To whom? To the man in the grey coat, said Aberforth Dumbledore. He had spent a year trying to find him, and had not managed it. So he had stopped trying, and had done the other thing instead. So he wrote to him, where he would be, and when, and what he was wearing on his left hand. The courtroom made a sound. He used himself as bait, said Marchbanks. He used the ring as bait. Same thing by then, it had grown into him. And the man came, said Griselda Marchbanks. 2:20. Aberforth stopped and rubbed his face with his hand, and went on in a flat voice that got flatter as it went. The door opened without the bell going, which is not possible, and a very tall old man was standing in the doorway with rain on his shoulders. No lamp this time. He stood on the mat and looked at the room the way a builder looks at a ceiling. He said, Good evening, Albus. And Albus said, Good evening, Tom. Would you like a chair? They talked for about 4 minutes. Aberforth could not repeat most of it and said so. The two of them talked like men picking up a conversation from the week before. It was, he said, the single most frightening thing he had ever watched in his life. Then Albus Dumbledore stood up. He did it properly, said Aberforth. Coat off, folded it on the bar, told me to get out from behind the counter and get down. Then he said, One more thing, Tom, before we start. And the other one said, Yes. And my brother said, I took it out of the floorboard 16 years ago, and I have had it ever since. And I am extremely sorry. How did he react? Said Marchbanks. He said, I know. That is all? Said the chair. He said, I know, and thank you for saying it out loud, said Aberforth Dumbledore. And then they started. I have watched a lot of people tell this part of the story badly, so let me be careful with it. This was not a great duel. It should have been. Two of the strongest wizards of the century, in a room, at the end of everything. But one of them was 70, with a dead arm after 16 years of mending clocks in a boarding house. The other was 115 and had roughly 6 weeks left in him. What happened in that bar was closer to 2 very old men falling downstairs than anything you would put in a painting. It lasted 90 seconds. Aberforth timed it, afterwards in his head, by how many times the clock over the door ticked, while he lay on the floor behind the bar with a broken bottle in his hand. My brother won, said Aberforth flatly. He won? He put him through 2 tables and down, bound him at the wrists. It was not close. It was never going to be close, whatever the papers said afterwards. I want that in the record. The papers had him as some kind of monster to the last, and he was nothing of the sort. He was an ill old man on a floor, and my brother had him in under a minute. Then how did Albus Dumbledore die? Aberforth looked at his hands. He stood up, he said, and he took 2 steps toward the door to send for the auras, and his heart stopped. Nobody in courtroom 2 moved. The ring, said Marchbanks. The ring. A year of it. He had been running on nothing but stubbornness since the spring, and the 90 seconds used the last of it. Aberforth's voice cracked once and came back. He went down by the door, and the other one was still tied on the floor with his face in the broken glass. The whole thing had happened in front of him, and I heard him laugh. He laughed. He laughed for about 2 seconds, and then stopped, and he said something I did not understand at the time. Aberforth looked up. He said, Oh, that is not fair? That is not fair at all? What did he mean? He meant he had not done it, said Aberforth Dumbledore. He had wanted it. Coming for it was why he was there, and he had lost. And then the thing happened anyway without him, and there is no name for what that does to a man like that. A whole life had gone into arranging the world, and the one death he wanted most. The world just handed to him, and it did not count. Marchbanks let a long moment pass. Mr. Dumbledore, what did you do? I came out from behind the bar. You were armed? I have been armed behind that bar for 61 years. Did you kill him? No, said Aberforth. I got to my brother first. That was the choice. I made it in about half a second and I would make it again. By the time I looked up, the ropes were cut and the door was open and the rain was coming in. He took the ring? Asked the chairwoman. He took the ring off my brother's hand while I was holding his head, said Aberforth Dumbledore. He had to break 2 fingers to get it. It was done carefully. He said, I am sorry about this, and I do not think he was talking to me. The clerk stopped writing and had to start again. And the wand? Said Marchbanks quietly. Aberforth's eyes came up. You know about the wand then. This inquiry has heard evidence from Mr. Ollivander about what the man in the grey coat spent 9 years looking for. Yes, we know about the wand. Aberforth Dumbledore sat back in the chair. For the first time all morning, he looked less like a barman and more like his brother. Nobody in that room had expected it, and several of them never got over it. 90 seconds, he said. That is how long the duel lasted, and you have all been sitting there thinking my brother spent it fighting. Did he not? He spent 80 of them fighting, said Aberforth. He spent the last 10 of them turning round and pointing that wand at me. The room went absolutely still. At you. At me. Behind my own bar, with my own wand in my hand, because I had it out, because a fight had started in my pub. Aberforth's voice was very steady now, and he looked at me down it and said, Ab. And I said, do not you dare. And he said it again. There was a man tied up on the floor, 8 feet away, who was going to be untied in about a minute, so I did the only thing left. You disarmed him. I disarmed my brother, said Aberforth Dumbledore, in front of a witness who could not see it from where he was lying, which is exactly why my brother did it there, and in that second, and not anywhere else in the last 100 years. He reached inside his coat. Mr. Dumbledore, said Marchbanks sharply, you may not draw a wand in this chamber. Then somebody had better come and take it off me, said Aberforth. I have had the thing in my coat for 11 months, and I have not slept properly once. I am not carrying it out of this building. And he laid it on the ledge in front of him, a long dark wand with knots in it, like the joints of an elder branch, and marks along the length that nobody in that room could read. It has been mine since the 29th of June, 1997, said Aberforth Dumbledore. It has never done a thing for me but light a fire. 9 years he hunted it, and it was 30 feet from him, in the pocket of a man who serves goat's milk in the whiskey, and he never once looked. Statement 13. Given under oath. They called Harry Potter on the 19th day. He walked in wearing a jumper because nobody had told him what people wore to these things, and Sirius Black had said the jumper was fine, and Sirius Black had turned out to be wrong. The oath went by. Then his name, his age, and his address. When he said the address, a house in Islington. About 40 quills scratched at once. It was the first time anybody had heard where he actually lived. Mr. Potter, said Marchbanks, you are 17. Yes, ma'am. You are not required to be here. I know. Then why are you? Harry thought about it. 3 weeks of sitting in a corridor had given him a lot of time to work out an answer. None of the good ones were true. Because everybody in this room has spent 19 days talking about what he was, he said, and I am the only one who talked to him. Marchbanks nodded slowly. Then take us to the 2nd of May, said the chairwoman. I would have to start on the 29th of April, said Harry, because that is when the letter came. The letter arrived at breakfast on a Wednesday, in the Great Hall. An ordinary school owl brought it, and nobody could afterwards identify the bird. It was addressed to Mr. H. Potter, 7th year, and inside it there were 4 lines in small, neat handwriting, with a slight tremble on the downstrokes. Harry read it out to the inquiry from memory, and then produced the original, and the clerk checked one against the other, and they matched exactly. I shall be at the main gates of the school at 9 o'clock on the evening of Saturday, the 2nd of May. I am coming to ask you one question. Bring whoever you like. It will make no difference to the question, and I would rather you were not alone. T.M. Riddle. What did you do? Asked Marchbanks. I took it to Professor McGonagall in about 11 seconds, said Harry, and she took it to the Auror office in about 9. And what did they do? Everything, said Harry. They did absolutely everything. I want to say that, because people have been rude about them in the paper this week, and it is not fair. There were 62 Aurors on that hill by Friday night. There were people in the trees at Hogsmeade and people on the lake. 2 of them spent 30 hours lying in a ditch on the Hogsmeade Road in the rain. Were you protected? Said Marchbanks. I was locked in the headmistress's office, with Sirius outside the door and Professor Flitwick outside the window, said Harry. I got out of it at 20 to 9. I used a passage that has been in a piece of parchment in my trunk since I was 13. Marchbanks put her hand over her eyes for a moment. Continue, Mr. Potter. He was early, said Harry. That is the first thing. Everybody was set up for 9, and he was at the gates at 20 past 8, and he stood there and waited and never came in because he could not. Could not? The wards. Professor Dumbledore rewrote them in 96 and Professor McGonagall added to them, and by that Saturday there were about 11 layers. Harry paused. He knew. Not once did he touch them. He just stood on the road with his hands where everybody could see them for 40 minutes. Was he armed? Asked Marchbanks. He had a wand in his coat, and he never took it out. Describe him. Harry was quiet for a second. Old, he said. Really old. A cough kept catching in him. He was leaning on the gatepost by the end and trying not to make it obvious. And every so often he would move his weight off one leg. And he was clean. That is the stupid thing I keep remembering. There had been a shave and a proper coat to come and stand in the road outside a school. And you went out to him. I went out to him, alone. No, said Harry. That is what I keep telling people. Alastor Moody came with me, and I did not know it. My father's cloak had been over him since 7:30. Taken off my bed while I was arguing with Professor McGonagall, he told me nothing because he knew I would say no. Marchbanks looked down at her papers. For the record, Mr. Potter, will you tell the inquiry what happened to Alastor Moody? He died on the road outside the gates at 9:04, said Harry. He did it on purpose and he did it very well. I would like everybody to stop calling it a tragedy because he would hate that. 62 auras came out of a bad position on about 1.5 seconds notice because of him. 79 years old. He was the only person on that hill who had ever fought him before. We will come back to that. First, the question. Yes. He said in the letter that he had come to ask you one question. He had. What was it? Said Marchbanks. Harry Potter looked at the floor of the witness box. Then at Griselda Marchbanks. Then, for a second, at the third row, where a man with long dark hair was sitting very still. He asked me to tell him the prophecy, said Harry. The whole room seemed to lean. Now I have to tell you the thing that makes this entire timeline worth 2 hours of your life, and I'm going to say it as plainly as I can. The man in the road had been looking for one thing since the 31st of October, and it was never power. Power he already had, a country too. He had the courts and half the newspapers and 3 departments of the ministry, and he could have had the minister's chair inside a year if he had thought a chair was worth anything. What he had been looking for since that night was a rule. His childhood had been spent in a place where things happened to people for no reason. His adult life had been spent proving that this was not true. There were laws underneath everything. A clever enough man could find them and stand on top of them, and then a woman he had told to move 3 times had refused. Something he could not name had thrown his own curse back into his chest. Waking up in a wood, he had no idea why he was alive. 16 years, a ring that turned out to be empty, a cloak he missed by 9 feet, a wand he never found, an arch he could not hear anything through. Every door he tried was a maybe, and there was one sentence in the world with his name in it, sitting on a shelf he could not reach. Only 2 people alive could lift it, a dead man's chosen boy and himself. Hogwarts was where he came to be told how he dies. That is the whole of it, not to escape it, to be told there was one. Did you tell him? Asked Marchbanks. Yes, all of it, every word. Professor Dumbledore gave it to me in 96, and I have known it by heart since about 10 minutes after. Why did you tell him? Harry Potter thought about that for a long moment. Because Professor Dumbledore told nobody anything for 16 years, he said, and a girl called Ivy Cobbett died in a waiting room. I've read what he wrote, and I'm not doing that. I've decided I'm not going to be a person who knows things and keeps them. Nobody wrote anything down for several seconds. And how did he receive it? He said thank you, said Harry. Thank you. He said thank you. Then he asked me to say the last line again, and I said it again. Neither can live while the other survives. And he stood there in the road, working it over. What did he say? He said, that is very badly written. Harry almost smiled. He said it twice. The grammar annoyed him. Then he said, "But it is a rule. It is the first one anybody has given me, and I am obliged to you." "And then?" said Marchbanks. "And then came the cloak. Your father's cloak. He asked politely. He said, 'I would like to see it.' And I said no. And he said, 'I thought not.' And that was the end of it. Not once did he try to take it. He had had a wand in his coat for 45 minutes and he never took it out once. Then how did the fighting start?" Harry's hands went flat on the rail. "Somebody on the hill lost their nerve," he said. "That is all it was. 19 days of this inquiry and 40 pages in the paper. And it comes down to a 23-year-old in a ditch in the rain. He had been lying there for 30 hours and he thought he saw the old man move. A curse was cast," said Marchbanks. "A stunning spell. It missed. It hit the gatepost. And then everything happened at once. Describe it." "He was faster than any of us," said Harry. "He was 71 and dying with a dead arm and still faster than 62 auras. I want that written down too. People keep saying he was finished and he was nothing of the kind. 11 people went down in under 20 seconds and none of them died. Not one. He had the time and chose otherwise." "Why not?" "He was going for the road," said Harry. "He was going downhill for the tree line and he nearly made it. The only person between him and the trees was a man he could not see. Alas to Moody." "Moody took the cloak off," said Harry. "That is why he died. Off it came, because there is no way to duel properly underneath it. He could have stayed under it and let him go past, and he came out instead." "How long did they fight?" "About 9 seconds." "Who won?" "Moody," said Harry Potter. "Moody won. Everybody keeps getting this wrong. Moody hit him with something that took his knee out. Down he went on the road, and up he did not come. That is when he killed Moody. From the ground, lying on his side, and that is the last spell he ever cast in his life." The clerk's quill was going very fast. "And then?" "And then it was over," said Harry. "It was just over. He was on his back on the road, knee ruined, with 40 wands on him. Everybody was screaming at him to drop it. Down went the wand on the tarmac, pushed away with 2 fingers. Then he lay there and looked at the sky and waited." "Did anyone speak to him?" said Griselda Marchbanks. "I did." "What did you say?" "I asked him whether he had used the ring." A murmur went across the whole chamber and Marchbanks let it run this time because she wanted it herself. "And had he?" "He had it in his coat pocket," said Harry. "They took it off him at the ministry that night and it is in a box in this building." "And yes, he used it. When?" "The night he took it. In a field. The same night. About an hour after Professor Dumbledore died." "What did he tell you?" Harry Potter took a breath. "He said he turned it 3 times and put it in his hand the way the book says," he said. "And he said that it works. That was what he wanted me to know. He said, 'It works. Potter, tell them it works, because it does. And nobody will believe you either.' Who came?" "One person," said Harry. "It only brings back people who loved you. He had a list in his head of everybody it might have been. And he told me the list was short and wrong anyway." "Who came?" "His mother," said Harry Potter. Nobody in courtroom 2 made a sound. "She died about an hour after he was born," said Harry. "She named him, and then she died. He told me he had spent his whole life thinking she was weak, and that she had chosen to go. And he said she stood in that field, and was not sorry for herself at all. She looked at him, and he could not do it." "Could not do what?" "Could not look back," said Harry. "He said, 'I turned around. She was there for as long as I held it, and I stood with my back to her. Then I let go. That is what I did, with the only thing I ever wanted.'" Statement 14. "Given under oath, and the finding of the inquiry." They gave Harry Potter a glass of water and 10 minutes. And then Griselda Marchbanks asked him the last question anybody was going to ask about Tom Riddle in a court of law. "Mr. Potter, you visited him in custody." "Twice." "Nobody authorised that." "No, ma'am." "How did you get in?" "I asked," said Harry. "There was a woman on the desk in the holding level who had been on shift for 11 hours. I asked her, and she said no. I asked her again. She looked at me for a while, and then she wrote my name in the book and told me to be out in 20 minutes. Her name? I will not give it," said Harry. "She has a job?" Marchbanks made a small note that she never read out. "Describe the cell." "It is not a cell like you are thinking," said Harry. "It is a room on the 9th level with a bed in it, a chair, and a screen across one corner. There are 2 healers and 4 auras outside, and a light that never goes off. That room had held him since the 3rd of May. His knee was in a splint. A jug of water stood on the table, untouched. The healer told me he had stopped drinking on the 7th, and would not say why. Did he know he was dying? Said Marchbanks. He had known for about 2 years. How do you know that? Because I asked him, and he told me, said Harry. He said the kidneys had started to go in 96. He knew what it meant, and he went to nobody. There is no healer in Britain who could have looked at him without recognising him. He could have gone abroad, said the chair. That is what I said. He said, yes. And, said Marchbanks. And his answer was, and then I would have been a sick old man in Vienna, said Harry Potter. And there is no version of that, where I am anybody. Marchbanks let that sit for a moment. What did you go there to do, Mr. Potter? The first time I went to shout at him, said Harry. I had a whole list. I got about 4 items in. He listened to every word and never interrupted once, which was the worst thing he could possibly have done. And the second time, asked the chairwoman, the second time I took a chessboard. The clerk stopped writing. Ada Fenwick, of the Obliviator headquarters, was sitting in the 11th row. On her knee was a folder holding 11 pages of the memories of a woman in Cleethorpes, who did not know she had ever given them. She put her hand flat on the folder and kept it there. Why a chessboard? Asked Marchbanks. I do not know, said Harry. I really do not. It was in the common room, and I picked it up on the way out. I have thought about it a lot, and I cannot tell you why. And did you play? Said Marchbanks. We played twice. Both times he beat me in about 11 moves, and there was no cruelty in it. The explaining never stopped. He said, you are not looking at the whole board, you are looking at the piece that is shouting. And then he set it up again, said Harry, and his hand stayed over it. He sat there with his hand over the board, and he said the thing I have been asked about by every single person in this building. I am going to say it exactly, because I was told to, and it was good advice. The room did not breathe. He said, from here, said Harry Potter. Marchbanks waited. That is all, said Harry. That is the whole of it. And he said, from here. Then he took his hand back. Nothing else came out of him for the rest of the time I was there. I left. He died the next afternoon. You are certain there was nothing more? Said the chairwoman. There was nothing more, ma'am. Everybody wants there to be more. There is not. In the 11th row, Ada Fenwick closed her eyes. She was the only person in the building who knew what those 2 words meant, and the law forbade her to say so. The only other living witness was an 83-year-old woman with a cat. For 4 years, that woman had watched a man put chess pieces back where they had been 11 moves earlier. From here, he would say, we play it again from before you made the mistake. Every single time the boy lost, he had said it. For 4 years. It was the kindest thing he had ever done for anybody, and it had cost him nothing. It was also the last thing he ever said out loud. It went into the record of the Wizengamot, with no explanation at all. A man in Louth who runs a garage and has 3 daughters would have understood it in about a second. Nobody ever told him. That is the whole tragedy of this timeline in one image, and I do not think I can improve on it, so I am going to leave it there. The inquiry sat for 3 more days. On the 14th of July, 1998, Griselda Marchbanks read out a finding of 11 pages, and there is only one part of it that anybody remembers. She found that Tom Marvolo Riddle had been mortal, killable, and locatable throughout the entire period. She found that the Ministry's operational doctrine had been wrong from 1982 onward, and that it had been wrong because it was built on an assumption nobody had ever tested. She found that the Department of Mysteries had spent 6 years attempting to use a child as an instrument on the basis of a theory that was never true. And she found that Albus Percival, Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, had known the truth from that December and had withheld it deliberately for 16 years. She found that his reasons had been considered, and serious and wrong. Then she put the paper down and said one sentence that was not in it. He was the cleverest man I ever examined, said Griselda Marchbanks, and the whole point of Clever Man is that somebody is supposed to tell him when he is being an idiot. There was nobody left alive who was allowed to. Then there was the matter of the body. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement had prepared a recommendation. It ran to 4 lines. The remains to be destroyed by fire, the ashes to be dispersed, no marker to be raised, and the name struck from the register of magical persons, so that in 100 years there would be no official record that anyone of that name had ever been born in Britain. A great deal of support stood behind it. A petition went round with 11,000 signatures on it. I've read some of the letters and I understand every one of them. Marchbanks asked one person for an opinion, and it was not a member of the Wizengamot. "Mr. Potter," she said, "you have sat in this room for 4 weeks. You are 17. Nobody in this building has a better claim to be asked, and nobody has less business being asked. I am going to ask you anyway. I am 111, and I shall not be here for the argument." Harry stood up in the 3rd row, next to Sirius Black, and he took a long time. "No," he said, "explain." Because he would have hated the fire and the ashes and all of that about as much as I hate saying this, said Harry, but he would have taken the last bit, the striking out. He would have taken that, and he would have been pleased. Pleased! He spent his whole life trying to be a name, said Harry. That is all it ever was. He built one out of nothing, because the one he had did not suit him. Everybody was so frightened of it that for 50 years the whole country would not say either of them out loud. There was a boat he could have got on in 82. He could have been Thomas Marks in Grimsby until he was 90 and mended clocks, and nobody would ever have found him. And I think he knew that, and he came back anyway. Back he came, because being nobody was worse than dying. Harry stopped and started again. "So, do not do him the favour," he said. "Write it down. Put it in the register with everybody else. Tom Marvolo Riddle, born the 31st of December, 1926, at Wool's Orphanage, London. Died the 13th of May, 1998, in a ministry holding room of kidney failure, aged 71. He sat down. "And the marker?" said Marchbanks. "There is a churchyard at Little Hangleton," said Harry, "with 3 stones in it that somebody cleaned all the moss out of in 1994 and never went back to check. Put him with them. Put his own name on it, not the other one. He can have the one he was given." They did it on the 11th of August. There were 4 people there, a ministry clerk, because the law required one, a stonemason from Kettering who had no idea whose grave he had cut and was told it was a family matter, Kingsley Shacklebolt, who did not explain to anybody why he came and never has, and Aberforth Dumbledore, who came because his brother would not have, and who stood at the back with his hands in his pockets for the whole 11 minutes and left without speaking. The stone says the name and the 2 dates and nothing else. It is the smallest one in that row. People go and look at it. Not many, and not often, and there is usually nobody there. Somebody has taken to pulling the weeds off it, and the ministry has quietly decided not to find out who. And here is the last thing, and then I will let you go. For 50 years, Wizarding Britain would not say his name, either of them. There were 2 words a whole country had agreed to keep out of its mouth. The agreement was so complete that people who had never met him flinched at a syllable. Children learned to flinch from their parents. It went on for a generation. That was the only immortality he ever actually managed. Not the ring, not the wand, not the cloak, not the arch. A silence in 30,000 people that he built by hand. And it broke in a courtroom that summer. A very old woman with an examination paper somewhere in her memory said it out loud, in a flat voice, twice, as though it were a name like any other, which it was. That was the point. That was always the point. That is the timeline. If it did something to you, subscribe, because there is another one coming and it is already half built. And go and settle one thing for me down in the comments. Dumbledore sat on the truth for 16 years and gave you his reasons in his own handwriting. 3 people died on his arithmetic, and 30,000 slept better. Was he wrong? Because I have read that deposition about 40 times now, and I still change my mind depending on the weather. Say it in the comments, and say the name while you're down there. It is only a name,